I never thought I'd find myself sitting alone in my living room, clutching my phone and fighting back tears on what should have been one of the happiest days of my life. The text message from my daughter-in-law, Rachel, glowed on the screen, each word cutting deeper than the last. Martha, I think it's best if you don't come to the baby shower on Saturday. We want to keep it intimate. Just real family. Just real family. The words echoed in my mind as I set my phone down with trembling hands. I was 65 years old, a widow who had spent the last 30 years of my life dedicated to my only son, James.
Comment where you're watching from. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching.
And now, 4 months before becoming a grandmother, I was being told I wasn't real family. I glanced around my living room at the carefully wrapped gifts I'd prepared for the shower, a hand-knitted blanket I'd spent months making, a silver rattle that had belonged to James when he was a baby, a check, a substantial one, to help with the nursery renovations. None of that mattered, to Rachel apparently. The phone rang, startling me. James's name flashed on the screen. I took a deep breath before answering. Mom? His voice sounded strained. Did you get Rachel's message? Yes, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I did. Look, I know it's disappointing, but Rachel's really stressed right now. Her parents are flying in from Chicago, and her sisters have all these plans. And there's no room for me? I asked quietly. A pause. It's just easier this way, Mom. You know how Rachel gets when she's overwhelmed. I closed my eyes, remembering how I'd emptied my savings account 3 years ago to help them buy the house they now lived in. The house where the baby shower would be held. The house that was technically still in my name because Rachel had insisted they couldn't qualify for a mortgage with James's student loans. I understand, I said, though I didn't. Not really. Thanks, Mom. I knew you would. I'll stop. By next week, okay? Love you. He hung up before I could respond. I set the phone down and walked slowly to the spare bedroom, the room I'd been gradually converting into a nursery for when my grandchild would visit. The yellow paint I'd chosen suddenly seemed too bright, almost mocking. I sat on the edge of the daybed, running my fingers over the stuffed animals I'd collected. The reality was sinking in. Rachel didn't just want to exclude me from a party. She was methodically pushing me out of their lives, and James was letting her. My eyes fell on a framed photo on the nightstand. James at his college graduation, his arm around me, both of us beaming with pride. I had worked 3 jobs to put him through school after his father died. Night shifts at the hospital as a nurse, weekends at a local diner, and bookkeeping for a small business on my days off. My hands had been permanently tired for nearly 2 decades, but I never complained. Not once. And now I wasn't real family. My phone buzzed again. A social media notification. Rachel had just posted a photo of the baby shower decorations with a caption about how excited she was to celebrate with everyone who matters most. I put the phone down and walked to my home office. In the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet, behind tax documents and insurance policies, was a folder labeled House, James, and Rachel. Inside was the deed to their home, the mortgage documents with my signature as the owner, and the agreement we'd made that they would assume payments while I retained ownership until they could refinance. Rachel had no idea that the house she was so proudly hosting her real family in tomorrow didn't belong to her. It never had. I closed the folder, my mind racing. I'd never used this as leverage. I'd never even mentioned it after they moved in. But as I thought about being excluded from my own grandchild's life, something shifted inside me. For the first time in decades, I felt a cold resolve replace my usual accommodating nature. I had spent my entire life putting others first, especially James. But if I didn't stand up for myself now, I would never have a place in my grandchild's life. Pulled out my phone again and scrolled to my attorney's number. It was time for Rachel to learn whose house she was really living in. The morning after receiving Rachel's text, I woke early, my eyes puffy from a night of fitful sleep. As I made my morning coffee, memories flooded back, not just of the recent years with Rachel, but of everything that came before. I was only 32 when Frank died. Heart attack, completely unexpected. One moment we were planning our 20th anniversary trip, and the next I was a widow with a 12-year-old son and a mortgage I couldn't afford on a single income. The insurance money had helped initially, but it wasn't enough for the long term. I had been a part-time nurse before Frank died, but afterward, I took every shift the hospital offered. Weekends at Dottie's Diner brought in tips that paid for James's clothes and school supplies. During tax season, I did bookkeeping for local businesses from our dining room table, often working until 2 or 3 in the morning. James would sometimes find me asleep over the paperwork, gently wake me, and help me to bed. Even as a teenager, he seemed to understand the sacrifices I was making. "We're a team, Mom," he would say, and we were. When he got into state university with a partial scholarship, I picked up even more hours. I sold Frank's beloved vintage car to cover the first semester's housing costs. On graduation day, when James walked across that stage in his cap and gown, the pride I felt outweighed all those years of exhaustion. I sipped my coffee, staring at the kitchen table where James had studied for his exams and where I'd helped him fill out his job applications. The same table where, 3 years ago, he had introduced me to Rachel. I had tried so hard to like her. She was beautiful and confident, with a marketing degree and ambitions to climb the corporate ladder. But something about her had felt calculated. From the start, the way her smile never quite reached her eyes when she looked at me, how quickly she steered conversations toward James's career prospects and away from his past. "Your house is so cozy," she had said during that first visit, her eyes scanning my modest living room with barely concealed judgment. James had met her at a work conference. 6 months later, they were engaged. And that's when Rachel started to show her true colors. "James tells me you have some savings," she said casually over dinner one night. "We found the perfect starter home, but with the wedding costs and James's student loans, we're a little short for the down payment. I had been saving that money for retirement, but the hopeful look on James's face had been my undoing. "How much do you need?" I asked. The little short turned out to be $75,000, almost everything I had managed to save after decades of careful budgeting. But I wanted James to be happy, and a house seemed like a solid investment. My attorney, Harold, had advised caution. "If you're providing the down payment, you should be on the deed," he had said. Rachel had objected initially, claiming it showed a lack of trust, but when the bank wouldn't approve their mortgage application due to James's debt-to-income ratio, she had relented. I became the legal owner of their house, with an agreement that they would make the payments and eventually refinance to put the property in their names. The arrangement was supposed to be temporary. That was 3 years ago. Every time I gently brought up refinancing, Rachel found a reason to delay. First, it was the wedding expenses. Then it was wanting to build up their savings. Most recently, it had been the pregnancy. Staring into my coffee, I realized the manipulation had begun long before yesterday's text message. Rachel had been working to distance James from me almost from the beginning. The weekly dinners we used to have dwindled to once a month, then to major holidays only. My phone calls went to voicemail more often than not. James's excuses always involved how busy Rachel was, how much pressure she was under at work. I had ignored the warning signs because I didn't want to lose my son. But now, with a grandchild on the way, the stakes were higher. Rachel clearly intended to minimize my role in their child's life, and by extension, in James's. My phone buzzed with a text from my neighbor, Evelyn. Saw the shower invitation. On Rachel's social media. Looking forward to celebrating with them tomorrow. My stomach clenched. So Evelyn, not even a relative, had been invited, but I hadn't. I set my mug down with more force than intended, coffee sloshing over the rim. Another text came through, this time from James. "Hey Mom, can you send that check for the nursery renovation today? Rachel wants to get started next week." No mention of the shower. No acknowledgement of how hurtful Rachel's message had been. Just a request for more money. Something inside me hardened. I had allowed myself to be used for too long, first out of love for my son, then out of fear of losing him. But what good was maintaining a relationship that had become so one-sided? I picked up my phone and called Harold. As it rang, I glanced at the family photos on my refrigerator. James's graduation, his wedding day, the 3 of us at last Christmas. In every recent picture, I noticed something I hadn't before. Rachel standing between James and me, her arm possessively around him, her body language creating a physical barrier. It was time to tear down that barrier, even if it meant risking everything. Chapter 3. The breaking point Saturday morning. The day of the baby shower. I found myself sitting in my car outside Harold's office, 30 minutes early for our appointment. I hadn't slept well, my mind racing with doubts. Was I overreacting? Would taking a stand cost me my relationship with James forever? My phone buzzed, a social media notification. With a sense of dread, I opened the app. There it was, a photo of Rachel, radiant in a pale blue dress, surrounded by decorations for the shower. The caption read, "So blessed to be celebrating our little one with the people who matter most." I scrolled through the comments. Rachel's mother. "Can't wait to meet my first grandchild." Her sisters, her college friends, even my neighbor Evelyn had commented. The party hadn't even started yet, and already the photos were being shared. Another notification popped up. Rachel had posted again, this time a group photo with what appeared to be 20 or more women gathered in my son's living room, in the house I had paid for. I zoomed in on the image, recognizing several of my own friends among the guests. Women I had introduced to Rachel. Women who had known James since he was a child. They all smiled at the camera, champagne glasses raised. In celebration, apparently untroubled by my absence. I closed the app, my hands shaking. It wasn't just that Rachel had excluded me. She had invited people from my life, my community, making my absence all the more conspicuous. This wasn't an oversight or a matter of keeping the event small. This was deliberate humiliation. At precisely 9 a.m., I walked into Harold's office. He had been my attorney since Frank died, helping me navigate the complexities of widowhood and single parenthood. Over the years, he'd become something of a friend. "Martha," he said, rising from behind his desk. His expression was concerned. "You sounded upset on the phone yesterday. What's going on?" I sat down, placing the house folder on his desk. "I need to know my options regarding the property." Harold adjusted his glasses, scanning the documents. "Well, legally speaking, the house is yours. You provided the down payment. Your name is on the deed, and you're the primary borrower on the mortgage. And if I wanted to make changes to that arrangement," he looked up sharply. "What kind of changes are we talking about?" "Martha," I hesitated. Speaking the words aloud would make this real. A line crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. "I want to transfer ownership of the house to a trust for my grandchild's future education, not to James and Rachel." Harold set down the papers. "That's a significant change. May I ask what's prompted this?" Tears threatened, but I blinked them back. Rachel has been systematically pushing me out of their lives. Yesterday, she explicitly uninvited me from the baby shower, saying it was for real family only. I showed him the social media posts from this morning. "I see," he said quietly. "And what does James say about all this?" "He enables it," I said, the truth painful to admit. "He always has some excuse for her behavior. I've tried to be understanding, to not make waves. But now with the baby coming," my voice caught. "I don't want to be written out of my grandchild's life before it even begins." Harold nodded thoughtfully. "Creating a trust is certainly within your rights. The house is your asset, but I have to ask, have you tried speaking directly to James about how you feel?" Every time I try, Rachel creates some drama that derails the conversation, and James always takes her side. I stared down at my hands. "I've given them everything, Harold. My savings, my time, my unconditional support, and it's never enough." "It rarely is with certain personalities," Harold said carefully. "Martha, I've known you for 20 years. You're not a vindictive person, but you do have a right to protect yourself and your interests. I don't want to punish them," I said. "I just want them to understand there are consequences to treating me this way. And I want to ensure that no matter what happens with our relationship, my grandchild will have something from me." Harold removed his glasses, cleaning them thoughtfully. "If I set up this trust, it doesn't have to be irrevocable right away. We could structure it as a warning shot across the bow, so to speak, something that gets their attention, but can be amended if behaviors change." Hope flickered faintly. "You mean I could still transfer the house to them directly if things improve?" "Exactly. The trust would be written with provisions allowing you to dissolve it under certain conditions. Think of it as leverage for a long overdue conversation." I nodded slowly. "How quickly can we do this?" "I can have the paperwork ready by Monday. In the meantime," he added, his tone gentle, "have you considered what you'll do if this doesn't bring about the change you're hoping for? If it instead pushes James further away?" The question hit me like a physical blow. "I'm already losing him, Harold. If I do nothing, Rachel will make sure I'm just the woman who sends checks and birthday cards. At least this way, I'll have stood up for myself." When I left Harold's office an hour later, legal wheels in motion, I felt oddly calm. For the first time in years, I was taking back control of my own life, my own relationships. It was terrifying, but also liberating. As I drove home, my phone rang. "James," I answered on speaker. "Mom, did you send that check yet? Rachel's really counting on starting the nursery renovations on Monday." "No, hello." "No, how are you? Just another request for money. I'll need to speak with both of you about that," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. Can you come over tomorrow afternoon? Tomorrow's not great. Rachel's parents are still in town, and it's important, James. A pause. Is everything okay? You sound strange. We'll talk tomorrow, I said. Bring Rachel. Mom, 3 o'clock, I said firmly and ended the call. As I pulled into my driveway, my phone pinged with another notification. Rachel had posted yet another photo from the shower, this one showing her opening a gift. The exact same silver baby rattle I had wrapped and ready to give. The caption read, "So grateful to my real mom for this family heirloom." Something inside me hardened. Tomorrow couldn't come soon enough. Chapter 4. The decision Sunday morning dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside me. I spent the early hours in my garden, tending to my roses, a ritual that had always calmed me since Frank's death. The methodical work of pruning, weeding, and watering gave me space to think. As I knelt in the soil, I remembered how James would play beside me as a child while I gardened, his toy trucks making roads between the flower beds. Back then, I thought I knew exactly what kind of mother I was. Patient, loving, perhaps a bit overprotective. But what kind of grandmother would I be now? The kind who remained silent to keep the peace, even as she was pushed further into the margins? Or the kind who drew a line, risking everything to maintain her dignity? At noon, Harold called to confirm he'd prepared the trust documents. "Everything's ready," he said. "I can email them to you now, or you can come by the office tomorrow to review them first." "Email them," I said. "I want to have them ready for our conversation today." After hanging up, I went to my home office and printed the documents Harold sent. As I read through the legal language, the reality of what I was about to do hit me. I wasn't just protecting my financial investment in the house, I was fundamentally changing my relationship with my son. There would be no going back to the way things were. I set the papers aside and opened my jewelry box, removing a small velvet pouch. Inside was my mother's sapphire ring, meant to be passed down to my son's wife one day. I had shown it to James years ago, explaining its history and significance. When he started dating Rachel, he'd asked about it once, wondering if I would give it to her when they got engaged. I had deflected, saying the timing wasn't right. The truth was, something had held me back. Some instinct I couldn't name had warned me to wait, to make sure Rachel was truly the right person to carry on this piece of family history. Now I knew why I had hesitated. I returned the ring to its pouch, then to the jewelry box. Some traditions were worth preserving, even if that meant waiting for another generation. At precisely 3 o'clock, I heard James's car pull into the driveway. Through the window, I watched him help Rachel out of the passenger seat. Her baby bump was more pronounced than the last time I'd seen her, almost 2 months ago. Despite everything, my heart softened at the sight of my grandchild growing inside her. The doorbell rang. I straightened my shoulders and went to answer it. "Mom," James said with a forced smile. "What's so urgent?" "Rachel's parents wanted us to take them to that new restaurant downtown, so we can't stay long." Rachel stood slightly behind him, her expression a mask of polite disinterest. "Martha," she said with a curt nod. "Come in," I replied, stepping aside. "This won't take long." They followed me to the living room, Rachel perching on the edge of the sofa as if afraid to get too comfortable. James sat beside her, his body language protective. Of her, not me. "How was the shower?" I asked, unable to keep a slight edge from my voice. Rachel brightened. "It was lovely. Everyone had such a wonderful time." "Everyone," I repeated. "Except me, of course." James shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, can we not do this now? Rachel's been really tired and—" "I saw the photos," I interrupted. "On social media. You had quite a crowd. My friends, my neighbors, everyone except me." Rachel's expression hardened. "We wanted a certain atmosphere. You tend to hover, ask too many questions." "I tend to care," I corrected her. "About my son. About my grandchild." "See?" Rachel looked at James. "This is exactly why we needed space. She's so possessive of you. Of us." James placed a hand on Rachel's knee. Mom, we appreciate everything you do, but sometimes we need to establish our own family traditions. Boundaries." "Boundaries?" I echoed. "Like explicitly uninviting me from celebrating my first grandchild? Are those the kind of boundaries you mean?" was one party, Rachel said dismissively. You're being dramatic. I took a deep breath. It's not just the party. It's the pattern, the gradual exclusion, the way you've been positioning yourself between James and me from the beginning. That's ridiculous, Rachel scoffed. James, tell her how ridiculous that is. But James was looking at me now, really looking at me for the first time in months. Something in my expression must have reached him. What do you mean, Mom? He asked quietly. When was the last time you called me just to talk? When was the last time we had dinner together? Just the two of us? I leaned forward. Every time I try to connect with you, Rachel has some reason why it's inconvenient, and you always take her side. Because she's my wife, James said. But his voice lacked conviction. Yes, she's your wife, and I'm your mother, the person who worked 3 jobs to put you through college, the person who has never asked you for anything in return. I paused. Except respect. And lately I haven't been getting even that. Rachel rolled her eyes. Here we go with the martyr routine. James, we need to leave. This is exactly the kind of drama I wanted to avoid at the shower. Actually, I said, reaching for the folder on the coffee table, you'll want to stay for this part. I removed the trust documents and placed them on the table. I've made a decision about the house. James frowned. What about the house? Your mother thinks because she helped with the down payment, she has some say in our lives, Rachel said quickly. But that was a gift, wasn't it, Martha? No strings attached. I smiled thinly. It wasn't just the down payment, Rachel. My name is on the deed. I am the legal owner of your house. The color drained from Rachel's face. What? James looked confused. But we make the mortgage payments. Yes, you do. But the house has always remained in my name. We discussed refinancing multiple times, but there was always a reason to delay. I looked directly at Rachel. Your idea, as I recall. Rachel stood up abruptly. This is absurd. James, tell her this is absurd. But James was staring at the documents on the table. Mom, what are you saying? What have you done? I've established a trust, I said, keeping my voice steady, for my grandchild's future education. The house will be transferred into this trust, effective immediately. Rachel's face contorted with rage. You can't do that. Actually, I can. The property is in my name. I've consulted with my attorney and everything is perfectly legal. James picked up the documents, scanning them with increasing disbelief. Mom, this doesn't make sense. We've been making the payments. We've been living there for 3 years. And you can continue to live there, I said. The trust allows for that. But the property will no longer be available for you to leverage or sell. It's protected for my grandchild now. Rachel grabbed the papers from James's hands, her eyes wild as she flipped through them. This is theft. This is manipulation, is it? I asked quietly. The way I see it, I'm simply protecting my investment in my grandchild's future. James stood up, running his hands through his hair. Mom, why are you doing this? If you needed the money back, you could have just asked. This isn't about money, James. It's about respect. It's about being treated like family. Not like an ATM you visit when you need something. That's not fair, he protested, but his eyes wouldn't meet mine. Isn't it? I reached for my phone, pulling up the photo Rachel had posted of the silver rattle. Your wife specifically uninvited me from your baby's shower, claiming I wasn't real family. Then she posted pictures of gifts identical to ones I'd bought. She invited my friends, my neighbors, making sure everyone would notice my absence. Tell me, what part of that feels fair to you? Rachel tossed the papers onto the coffee table. You're twisting everything. James, we need to leave. Now. But James didn't move. He was staring at the photo on my phone, then at Rachel. You told me your mother bought that rattle. Rachel's cheeks flushed. This is ridiculous. Your mother is trying to drive a wedge between us. Can't you see that? What I see, James said slowly, is that my mother is upset. And I'm starting to understand why. He turned to me. Mom, I had no idea Rachel told you not to come to the shower. She told me you couldn't make it because you had a doctor's appointment. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. I never said that, I whispered. She texted me explicitly saying I wasn't welcome. James turned to Rachel, his expression hardening. Is that true? Rachel crossed her arms defensively. Your mother is overbearing. She's constantly hovering, asking inappropriate questions about our finances, our plans. I needed one day, one single day, to celebrate without her making everything about her relationship with you. So you lied to me? James asked. I protected our special day, Rachel insisted. And now she's punishing us for it by threatening to take away our house. It was never your house, I said quietly. That's what... You don't seem to understand. I bought that house so my son and grandchild would have a safe place to live. I never gave it to you, Rachel. I allowed you to live there. Mom, James said, his voice tight with emotion. I had no idea you felt this way. Why didn't you say something sooner? A lump formed in my throat. I tried, James, so many times. But whenever I brought up concerns about how Rachel was treating me, you dismissed them. You always had an excuse for her behavior. I was overreacting. I was being too sensitive. I was expecting too much. James sat back down, looking suddenly exhausted. I didn't realize. I thought you two just needed time to bond. Rachel's laugh was bitter. Bond? She's never accepted me. From day one, she's treated me like I wasn't good enough for her precious son. That's not true, I said firmly. I welcomed you into our family with open arms. I gave you my savings for a house. I offered to help plan your wedding. I knitted baby blankets and bought nursery furniture. I leaned forward. What I didn't do was give you permission to erase me from James's life, or from my grandchild's. For a moment, the room was silent, except for the ticking of the grandfather clock, a wedding gift from Frank's parents that had survived decades of moves and life changes. Finally, James spoke. The trust. Can it be reversed? Rachel gasped. James, you can't be serious. She's threatening us. No, I said, ignoring Rachel's outburst. I'm setting boundaries. There's a difference. James nodded slowly. And these boundaries, what exactly are they? I took a deep breath. I want to be acknowledged as your mother and your child's grandmother. That means being included in family events. It means regular visits once the baby is born. It means being treated with basic respect and consideration. And if we agree to that, James asked, then we can discuss transferring the house into both your names after the baby arrives. But I need to see real change, James, not just promises. Rachel stood up, grabbing her purse. This is extortion. I won't stand for it. James remained seated. Rachel, please, let's just talk about this. There's nothing to talk about. Your mother is using money to control us, and you're just sitting there letting her. The way I see it, James said quietly, she's asking for basic respect, and that shouldn't be such a difficult thing to give. Rachel's eyes widened in disbelief. You're taking her side? After everything we've built together? I'm not taking sides, James insisted. I'm trying to understand why my mother feels so excluded that she felt this was her only option. I don't have to listen to this, Rachel snapped. I'm leaving. She stormed toward the door, pausing only to glare back at James. Are you coming or not? James looked from Rachel to me, then back to Rachel. Something in his expression had changed, a clarity I hadn't seen in years. No, he said firmly. I'm going to finish this conversation with my mother. You can take the car. I'll call an Uber when we're done. The silence that followed his declaration was deafening. Rachel stood frozen by the door, clearly stunned that her ultimatum had failed. Fine, she finally hissed. Have your little mommy-son reunion, but don't expect me to forget this. She yanked open the door and slammed it behind her. As the sound of her car engine faded down the street, James turned to me, his eyes filled with a mixture of confusion, hurt, and dawning recognition. Mom, he said softly, I think we need to start over. Tell me everything I've been missing. 4 months later, I stood in the hospital corridor, a small gift bag clutched in my trembling hands. The maternity ward was quiet in the early morning hours, with only the occasional sound of a nurse's footsteps or a newborn's cry breaking the silence. James appeared at the end of the hall, his face tired but radiant with joy. Mom, he called, softly. Come meet your grandson. My heart swelled as I followed him into the room. Rachel sat propped up in bed, a tiny bundle cradled in her arms. Her face was drawn with exhaustion, but when she looked up at me, there was no hostility in her eyes, just weary acceptance. Martha, she said, adjusting the blanket around the baby's face. Would you like to hold him? I couldn't speak, could only nod as she carefully transferred my grandson into my waiting arms. He was perfect, tiny nose, rosebud lips, a wisp of dark hair like James had as a newborn. As I gazed down at him, years of hurt and resentment seemed to fall away, replaced by a love so fierce it took my breath away. His name is Frank, James said softly. After Dad, tears filled my eyes. You remembered. Of course I did. James placed a hand on my shoulder. "Mom, I'm so sorry for everything, for not seeing what was happening, for not standing up for you sooner." I glanced at Rachel, who was watching us with an unreadable expression. The past 4 months had been a difficult journey for all of us. After that confrontational Sunday, James had stayed at my house for nearly a week, giving Rachel space while we talked. Really talked, for the first time in years. He'd been shocked to learn the full extent of Rachel's behavior toward me, the subtle manipulations and not-so-subtle exclusions. When he finally returned home, he'd insisted on counseling, both as a couple and, surprisingly, with me included in some sessions. The process had been painful. Rachel had initially resisted, threatening divorce, but the reality of her situation, pregnant, in a house she didn't own, with limited financial resources of her own, had eventually convinced her to try. In therapy, we'd uncovered the root of much of Rachel's behavior. Her own difficult relationship with her mother, who had been controlling and critical. Rachel had projected those fears onto me, convinced I would try to take over their lives, their parenting. Understanding didn't excuse her actions, but it helped us find a path forward. "Would you like some tea, Martha?" Rachel asked now, gesturing to the bedside table where a hospital employee had left a small service. It was a small thing, this offer, but significant. 4 months ago, she wouldn't have considered my comfort at all. "Thank you. That would be lovely," I said, still gazing at Frank's perfect face. James poured the tea, then sat on the edge of Rachel's bed. "We've been talking," he said carefully, "about the house situation." I looked up, waiting. "We appreciate what you did," Rachel said, her voice measured. "Setting up the trust for Frank's education. It was thoughtful." Coming from Rachel, this was a monumental admission. "But," James continued, "we were hoping you might consider a compromise, one that recognizes the progress we've made as a family." I gently rocked Frank, who had begun to stir. "I'm listening. We'd like to refinance," James said. "Put the house in our names as we originally planned. But," he added quickly, "we want to establish a separate college fund for Frank, with both Rachel and I contributing monthly. And we'd like you to be a co-trustee, so you have a say in how those funds are used for his education." It was a reasonable proposal, one that acknowledged my concerns while allowing them the independence they needed. "There's something else," Rachel said, meeting my eyes directly. "We'd like you to come over for Sunday dinner. Every Sunday. It's important for Frank to have his grandmother in his life regularly." The sincerity in her voice was unmistakable. This wasn't just a concession. To get the house, this was a genuine olive branch. "I'd like that very much," I said softly. Rachel nodded, then hesitated before adding, "And I've been thinking about the nursery at your house. It would be good for Frank to have a comfortable place to stay when he visits you. Maybe we could finish setting it up together." The gesture brought fresh tears to my eyes. "I would love that, Rachel." Frank began to fuss in my arms, his tiny face scrunching up. Rachel reached for him and I carefully handed him back. "He's probably hungry," she said, adjusting her hospital gown. She looked up at me, a flicker of vulnerability crossing her face. "Would you mind giving us a moment?" "Of course," I said, rising. "I'll wait outside." James followed me into the hallway, closing the door gently behind us. "She's trying." "Mom," he said quietly. "It's not easy for her, but she's really trying." "I know," I replied. "And so am I." He pulled me into a hug, something he hadn't done spontaneously in years. "Thank you," he whispered, "for not giving up on us." Over the following months, our new arrangement took shape. The house was refinanced into James and Rachel's names. The college fund was established with monthly contributions from all three of us. And every Sunday, without fail, I joined them for dinner. It wasn't perfect. Rachel still had moments of tension, of pulling back. I still sometimes felt the urge to offer unsolicited advice or to question their decisions. But we were learning, all of us, to respect boundaries while still remaining connected. One Sunday evening, nearly 6 months after Frank's birth, I arrived for dinner to find Rachel alone in the kitchen, the baby monitor on the counter beside her as she prepared a salad. James had to run to the store, she explained. We were out of pasta. I hung my purse on the back of a chair, uncertain. Despite our progress, Rachel and I had rarely been alone together. "Can I help with anything?" I offered. She hesitated, then nodded toward the cutting board. "You could slice the tomatoes if you don't mind." We worked in companionable silence for a few minutes before Rachel spoke again. "I want you to know," she said, not looking up from her task, "that I understand what you did with the house, why you did it." She paused. "If someone tried to keep Me from Frank, I'd probably do much worse. It was the closest thing to an apology I was likely to get, and I accepted it for what it was. A recognition, finally, that my feelings mattered too.
Thank you for saying that, I replied. Rachel glanced toward the baby monitor as Frank's coos came through the speaker. He's waking up from his nap. Would you mind getting him while I finish this?
Are you sure? I asked, surprised by the request. She nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. He always seems happier when his grandmother holds him anyway. As I climbed the stairs to the nursery, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The house around me was still the same one I had purchased years ago, but everything else had changed. I was no longer the outsider, the uninvited grandmother. I was exactly where I belonged, in the heart of my family.